right, folks. So this week we have Torah portion Shelach. Sometimes it's called Shelach Lekha, and there is a. This is the Shelach means send. Obviously, it's a Shaliach is an apostle, one who is sent, and this is in reference to the opening lines of this portion in chapter 13 of Numbers of Bamidbar, where it says, "Send for yourself spies to spy out the land." And so we are going to be discussing this evening the sending out of the 12 spies into the land of Israel. And I know, I am confident that we have some really interesting and amazing things to learn from this portion today. And I want to remind you that Paul addressed this in the book of the Corinthians, the letter to the Corinthians. And I want to share with you that we need to remember that these things were written for our instruction. Everything that happens from Egypt until they get into the Promised Land was written specifically for this generation at this time upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And we need to continuously be asking ourselves as we study these different Torah portions, because I'll remember that all of the Torah is giving us the backstory of how did we end up in Egypt. That's all covered in the book of Genesis. And then from there forward, it's just that time in the wilderness as we are trying to make our way through the wilderness and arrive in the land of promise. And Paul tells us in Corinthians that all of this was written expressly for us, and that we have so many things that we can learn from this. And I hope that will be what we'll be taking a look at tonight. So I want to begin by reading just this section of 1 Corinthians for you. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning right at the beginning of this chapter and going up to approximately verse 13. So here's what it says. I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Messiah. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now, these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us test Yuvah, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed, that he does not fall. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to humanity. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. Those words are so relevant to us, just as Paul tells us here. These words are relevant to us, and the words that we're reading in this Torah portion are incredibly relevant to us. Now, you notice that he says these things happened to them as an example. That almost sounds like, and it wouldn't surprise me because Paul has said things like this before, the things that happened to those people in those days was allowed to happen or somehow manipulated to happen for a purpose, for us, as he reiterates in chapter 10, verse 11, that these things happened for our instruction. They were getting instruction from these words in the Torah portion in Paul's day, and we are getting instruction from these words in the Torah portion in our day, especially in our day. Because the ends of the ages have most assuredly drawing nigh unto us. And I would say what's quite fascinating, do you notice that Paul here tells us not only that these things were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come, not only that, but he tells us that these things have come upon us as we will be tested in the same ways as they were, and that we need to be very conscientious about how we react to these things that happen to them, because they're going to happen to us. And he not only gives us this heads up about, hey, learn from these people who were in the wilderness, because this is particularly relevant to us who are living at the end of the age. He gives us clear things to watch out for. And did you notice, quite fascinating, that what he's telling us that we need to watch out for are the same exact things that the apostles talked about at the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15? Idolatry, sexual immorality, and food. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? That the things... Excuse me?
That's crazy.
Is that not crazy?
That is crazy.
It is crazy. These
things that change.
Yes, that we are, and I'm sure that you're beginning to pick up on this as you continue on your studies and you begin to learn and continue to learn. They keep saying the same thing to us over and over and over. Because we're thick, we're hard of hearing. We have become numb, unfortunately. And I'm only hoping that as we continue to learn and grow, that we will have some of this stuff continue to sink in, because he just keeps, the Bible, God, Yeshua, the apostles, they keep telling us the same stuff over and over and over and over and over. I know, having been a teacher, Angela too, and some of you perhaps, know that, rote learning is pretty important. Now that fell out of favor when I was being trained as a teacher. That was like old school, where you just pound it into their brain and make them repeat it over and over and over and over and over.
They don't hear it the first time you say it.
Yeah, they don't hear it the first 10 times you say it.
Just don't.
But, there's a reason that rote has been practiced in many cultures for a long time. We, of course, in America, because of our incredible cleverness, decided that wouldn't work for us anymore. Now our students know nothing. But these apostles and these writers of the Bible keep telling us the same things over and over and over and over and over. Look out, because there are pitfalls regarding idolatry. There are pitfalls regarding your sexuality. There are pitfalls regarding food. Those same three things just repeated over and over and over. And you can see that the children of Israel are stumbling over these things repeatedly. The apostles dealing with it in regard to bringing Gentiles into the faith in the book of Acts. and Paul dealing with it still again when writing that letter to the Corinthians. They're still stumbling over that stuff. And we are still stumbling over it today. And so, as we read the episode of the spies, pay really close attention to what this has to teach us. It is so very critical, especially for what the time we're living in and the things that are happening around us and the way that we're dealing with it. So be really, really paying attention to this. I want to point out to you one other thing that is not entirely related, but it is related to the times we're living in and things that you may have to put up with. Note that in this letter to the Corinthians in chapter 10, verse 13, he begins to talk about how no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to humanity. You're not undergoing some strange bit of testing, some strange bit of temptation. Now remember that there is a very big difference between temptation and testing. God will either bring into your life or allow into your life testing, so that your faith may be tested and be found to be genuine, refined by fire like gold. Temptation is something different. Remember, the book of James tells us that each one is tempted when his own inner lusts latch onto something. So he is telling us here in verse 13 that no temptation has overtaken you, but what happens to everyone. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. Now, this is quite fascinating because it seems to be mixing the two things of temptation and testing. This seems to be telling us that God will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able. Now, I just want to correct one thing for you. Most of your Bible translations are going to say that with the temptation, he will provide a way of escape from the temptation. That is not terribly accurate. You need to just make a note to yourself in your Bible that escape from trial, escape from temptation is not exactly an accurate translation. A better translation would be he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide a way through the trial, the temptation, so that you are able to endure it. You wouldn't, and the language just after that kind of gives it away. Why would you have to endure something if you were going to escape it?
Can I chime in?
You please do.
With maybe a little different thought on that.
Please.
So as I read this, it's clearly about this wilderness experience and comparing ours to theirs. And the Greek word there for escape is ekbasis. Strong says it's an exit or a way of escape. Mm-hmm. And I look at this personally as when the Israelites came up against that sea, it appeared that there was no way out. And that there was this evil was going to overtake them. There's no possible escape. And that even in that moment, Jehovah made a way by parting the waters. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind, that when our backs are against the wall and it looks as if there's no way out, he is faithful to make a way of escape for us as well.
Absolutely. Fantastic observation.
May I add to that?
Please.
Somebody had to have the nerve to put their foot in the water. or to make, because Moses had his staff in the water, but somebody had to have the faith to get in there and risk, going through. I think it's a 12-mile stretch. That's a lot of faith to hope that the walls won't fall in on you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Very, very good insights. Awesome. So that's just getting us started for story time that's coming up next here. There's such huge critical things happening in this section that I next want to read for you a bulk of this portion. This is a fairly short portion, and I don't intend to read all of it, but there's some key information here that I want to read to you. You can look at the screen, you can kick back and close your eyes and put your feet up and whatever you want. I'm going to read this section to you, starting in Numbers chapter 13, verse 17. Starting in Numbers 13:17. Here's the story of the spies. When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, at Lebo Hamat. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between two men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the valley of Eshcol, because of the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the valley of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan." Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." Numbers chapter 14. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is Yahweh bringing us into this land to fall by the sword?" So they said to one another, "Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt." Then Moshe and Aharon fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothing. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, "The land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If Yahweh is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against Yehovah, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and Yehovah is with us. Do not fear them." But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Then the glory of Yehovah appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. Yehovah said to Moshe, "How long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they." But Moshe said to Yehovah, "Then the Egyptians will hear of it, for by your strength you brought up this people from their midst, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people, for you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye, while your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, 'It is because Yehovah could not bring his people into the land which he promised them by oath. Therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness.' But now I pray, let the power of Yehovah be great, just as you have declared. Yehovah is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generations. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people, according to the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you also have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now." So Yehovah said, "I have pardoned them according to your word, but indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of Yehovah. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by way of the Red Sea." Yehovah spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "How long will I bear with this evil congregation who are grumbling against me? I have heard the complaints of the sons of Israel which they are making against me. Say to them, 'As I live, says Yehovah, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Yehoshua, the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they will know the land which you have rejected. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. According to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear your guilt a year, for even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. I, Yehovah, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they will die. As for the men whom Moshe sent to spy out the land, and who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing out a bad report concerning the land, even those men who brought out a very bad report of the land died by a plague before Yehovah. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive out of those men who went to spy out the land. When Moshe spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people mourned greatly. In the morning, however, they rose up early and went up to the ridge of the hill country, saying, Here we are. we have indeed sinned, but we will go up to the place which Yehovah has promised. But Moshe said, why then are you transgressing the command of Yehovah when it will not succeed? Do not go up, or you will be struck down before your enemies, for Yehovah is not among you. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned your back from following Yehovah, and Yehovah will not be with you. But they went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country. Neither the ark of the covenant of Yehovah nor Moshe left the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and struck them and beat them down as far as Hormah. There it is, folks. That is essentially the story of the spies stumbling over themselves, trying to get into the land. That did not turn out very well. Now, I used to, previously, when I would read a section like that, I would ask you to share with me your thoughts regarding things that you saw in that text that you found interesting. Not to go off too far on a rabbit trail or anything, but just to make note of things that you saw, elements that were interesting, something that caught your eye, something that maybe you hadn't seen before or recognized, or something that you think, man, that's significant, and we need to think about that. Does anybody have anything that they would share regarding what we just read? Okay. That's fine. That's fine. All right. Here's what I want to say. Number one, you undoubtedly, as you're looking at this, you're saying to yourself, if you're not, haven't looked at it a little bit more deeply, why did God tell them to send spies into the land? Actually, he didn't. If you read, there is a parallel account of this incident in Deuteronomy chapter 1, at the end of chapter 1. And it basically gives us more detail. And this is why this Torah portion is send for yourself, Shelach Lekha. Send for yourself. It tells us in Deuteronomy that Moshe was approached by the people who demanded to send spies in, and Moshe thought it was a good idea, and then God said, go ahead. He gave permission and said, go ahead, send people in. But when you read it at the beginning of this section, it almost sounds like it was God's idea. I'm fairly confident that this was not God's idea. God had no intention of sending spies into the land because he didn't need to. He had already given them the information that they needed. They had all the information that they needed, and they should have been ready to go to do what God had told them to do. However, I fully understand what has happened here. Thus, in our own time, we have, whether a healthy or an unhealthy fascination with needing more details, especially when there is, we seem to be, unfortunately, of two extremes. You either are acting a little bit fearful, where you want to get your mind around every nook and cranny of any situation before you begin to feel comfortable with it. You can explore every nook and cranny and all the options and what could possibly go wrong and what if this happens and how am I going to handle that? And you can be paralyzed by fear just being out there and trying to gather more information. And to some, it may look like you're just being wise and gathering information and counsel to make a good decision. But that can go too far sometimes, to where you can get paralyzed by fear and indecision based upon too many options. On the other end of the extreme are people who seemingly are ready to just jump without any thought at all, and foolishness will result. Now, that is different than someone who has faith and says, this is what God told me, This is what I want to do. God told me to do it. I'm ready to do it. Let's go. That's a different thing. Us, seemingly so much of the time, are balancing between these way opposite poles of needing too much information and wanting to fill our mind with every nook and cranny of what could possibly go right, what could possibly go wrong, or just acting foolishly and jumping off a cliff without any real input, without any real wisdom and guidance. But we do not like the unknown, but it tests our faith. This is a really, really powerful faith tester. When we don't feel like we have a good handle on what's happening or why it's happening or what it's going to look like when it's done, we can stumble all over ourselves, lacking faith. But God did allow his people to satisfy their fearful need for more details. Go ahead. Of course he knew what was going to happen. But please, Tracy?
Could you give me the cross-reference for that Deuteronomy?
Yes, that is Deuteronomy 1:22.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Alan, I think it was just kind of playing out. The people were already lacking in faith.
Clearly.
They were already not going to go into the land. Them sending those spies in was just kind of playing out. They weren't looking for more information. They didn't become full of fear at the account of the spies. I think they were already lacking the faith, and maybe they were just looking for a reason. I mean, I know what you're saying in general, but I think in this case, look, the people were just a faithless generation that we're all going to get to die in the desert.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Nathan, that what you're looking at here is the manifestation of the spirit of fear that was already in the people, and that they just needed something to open those floodgates and let that spirit of fear out. And you can see, we'll talk about this in a moment, what happens when that spirit of fear takes over. Angela would like to say a couple of words. I'm going to give the microphone to her for just a moment.
That word for spies that he's using, we covered this back when we did Jonah. That word for spies is actually tur, and it's another word for dove, and it's about that searching out, that hovering, and you got to think back to Noah. That wasn't the word used for dove back in Noah, but it's the same idea of this thing flying around and gathering information and searching out. That's the word used for spies. And it's used in this incident more than a dozen times for this searching out. But the first use of this word happened in our last Torah portion, where Noah set out with the ark on a 3-day journey, which we covered in Jonah. What that 3-day, the 3 day is a change from one state to another. That's what the 3 means, and that was the first use of this word search out. And you'll notice that at the end of all this searching out that they did, in this next dozen or more times that word is used, when they actually do try to take the land, that the ark was not with them, and that's specifically stated. And so I think that's a contrast, that your searching out is done with the ark. It's not done with the ark left behind.
Thank you, Angela. Anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns about that?
I have a comment, not about that, but just about that cross-reference you gave for Deuteronomy 1:22.
Yes.
And so Yahweh says, "You came near to me, every one of you, and you said, 'Let us send men before us, and they shall search out the land, and they shall bring us backward as to the way in which we shall go up.'" And this is something I'm constantly, harping on it, because I think it's the same thing. It's like, didn't Yahweh already tell you it's okay? And then we have to ask men for their opinions.
Yep.
It's just like, spiritually speaking, that's what we still do to this day. Well, yeah, God's word says this, but let me just see what my pastor says, or let me just see what my so-and-so person says, because they know more than I do, and we're just not listening and going right to the source.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good observation. And unfortunately, it has to do with us being lazy Frankly, I don't think there's any other way to word it. We are just lazy. If we wouldn't need to go to some other person and say, "Hey, you know your Bible. What does this say?" We would look it up ourselves, and we would have a little bit of wisdom or insight to kind of look into it and be able to search it out for ourselves. But I think, unfortunately, we have become so our Bibles have become so alien to us that we don't really get it when we open the thing up.
And people don't believe that God can speak to them directly either.
Right.
And I'm talking about in our day and age anyway.
Sure.
And, I liken it to like if my dad wrote me a letter when I was a kid or something and said, "Hey, here's some instruction, I want you to do these things." And I read that letter and I didn't understand it quite. And so I took that letter to somebody else and said, "What did he mean by this?" When I could just go to my dad and say, "What did you mean by this?" That's my mentality. It's just go to the source and ask your father.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
I think there's,
Go ahead, Mikey, please.
I think there's also an accountability factor here where people are comfortable with others making that decision and kind of placing the weight on someone else. We're supposed to work out our faith with fear and trembling.
Yeah.
But maybe a real world example of something I deal with every day at work. People are scared to make decisions. They're looking to everyone else to hold the weight of whatever that decision is going to be, and they're just in fear to step up to the plate.
Yeah.
And in our relationship, we're required to do that. Each of us individually. We can't expect that weight to fall on someone else.
Taking responsibility is tough. It comes with some weight. There's some real heft behind the idea of taking responsibility for yourself, and people are really uncomfortable with that. There's no question about it. They are just not comfortable with taking responsibility for themselves, and unfortunately, we've just become complacent, and I'm real bummed about that. But all I can do is, and this is not speaking to you guys, but, I feel like sometimes that the best thing that I can do as a person who's, talking about the Bible with a group of people is to just read it and discuss it openly. What does it say? What does it mean? What is its relevance to me personally? Because unfortunately, if you've been to any kind of a religious assembly in any number of years, it's really hard to find a congregation of believers who are sitting down and just reading it and talking about it and learning from it. It's very unusual to see that these days, unfortunately. And I just feel like, sometimes I get in over my head and I think, I really have to do some study and come up with something clever and neat that, people haven't heard before. It's like, do I really need to do that? I don't think so. I think I have to continuously remind myself, no, you just need to read it and you just need to talk about it because no one else is doing that. And it's not to say that that's all that you guys need, because I know that you guys are reading your Bibles, and sometimes I try to bring in something interesting, that will hopefully be interesting for you. But I feel like that, just being faithful to actually read it, just being faithful to actually, I'm reminded continuously of the book of Nehemiah or Ezra, which one of those I don't remember, where they read the Torah during the Feast of Sukkot, and the Levites were kind of weaving away through the crowd, helping the people to understand the sense of what was being read. That's such a powerful thing, and it just doesn't happen very often. And so I think that's such a powerful thing that needs to just happen more. Jumping down off of the soapbox.
That's exactly what you need to be doing, and that's what we appreciate, is that you're actually reading the Bible. And looking at it together as a group and analyzing it. I think that's powerful. Also, too, it's when we rely on other people, that's not safer at all. Like as far as blind leading the blind type of thing.
Sure.
Look back at the garden and how they were passing the blame. Did God accept that? Oh, okay. So it was her fault, not your fault. Got it. Okay. So she
Right.
told you. Oh, but the Satan told her.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. No,
That's such a great insight, because for people living in the Middle Ages, where most Bibles were written in some language that people didn't understand, and they had to listen to their local parish priest or something tell them what the Bible meant, you might have had an excuse. You really might have had an excuse. I believe that you probably could have gotten away with a lot of stuff. And God would say, hey, I know, man, you're speaking English and your priest is speaking Latin. You don't even understand what he's saying. So I can't really fault you. I have given you a conscience so that you can tell what my word says. But, we may have had a little bit more leeway in those days. But now, where every home in America, even the godless, have a Bible, or a Bible app is on your phone, you can read it in its original language, word for word. Sweet mother of pearl. There's no excuse. There's just not going to be any excuse. You're not going to be able to say, I didn't know. That's not going to fly.
Yeah, and I want to just clarify, too, that I'm not saying we don't need to listen to each other. That's not what I'm saying.
No, I understand. But here's the thing. Here's what I would say in that regard. We should build each other up. We should talk about these things. And there are men who are led by God, who are fabulous teachers and have good wisdom and are diligent in searching their scriptures and digging into it and are able to share wonderful wisdom and insight from it. But here's the thing. This is the big problem. Listening to other men is not necessarily the problem. Not knowing anything yourself, that's the problem. Because you can't test what other men are telling you unless you know the word yourself. So there are good teachers out there who are able to teach you things, and you should listen to them if you are able to actually judge rightly divide the word of what they're telling you. If you don't know your word at all, you'll listen to what anybody's saying. You have no way of testing it. But if you don't know the word, you can fall for anything. But if you're familiar with the word of God, and you are bringing it into your heart and your mind and your soul daily, when some teacher gets up there and starts talking some nonsense, you should immediately, because your mind is filled with His Word and the Spirit of God, say to yourself or others around you, that's just not so.
Alan, it also, I think of in the New Testament, I can't think where it says it. It says to desire the sincere milk of the Word. But in another place, or near that same place, it talks about being taught as little children, as babes, but then we're supposed to be growing up and needing the meat for the more protein. You don't give a baby high protein, but you give the baby the sincere milk of the Word.
You are correct. You are correct. That is in the
Stay in the baby milk phase, and that's not what we were designed to do.
Right. Absolutely. That is in the book of James, and it's not for no reason that where it's talking about desiring the sincere milk of the Word, that by it you may grow up in respect to salvation. Just near there, in another passage, it says that those who are teachers will be judged more severely. It's all related. So I say to you, be familiar with it. Not because you've listened to somebody else tell it. Read it for yourself if you haven't. It's totally available. And you may not understand what you're reading in some passages. There's definitely some mystery there. There's some trippy stuff happening and some difficult things to understand and some language that doesn't make sense. But if you dig a little bit, you can find the answer. It's not too hard. We've talked about Bible study tools and methods before and how you can find the answers to some of your questions. Dig into the language of the original language. There's no better way than that to do it. Sorry, fully, again, disengaging from the soapbox. I apologize. I want to spend just a moment taking a look with you at, it's always, as Rabbi David Foreman is fond of saying, when you come across a passage in your Bible, you should always, if you hear alarm bells going off saying, where have I heard this before? You pay attention to that. Because that is the Spirit of God, perhaps, drawing your attention to where you've heard this before. This has happened before, or something like that. I was drawn to a passage in the beginning of the book of Joshua, because Joshua also sent spies into the land of Canaan. And I want to share with you a couple of notes that I made. I'm not going to read that passage from the book of Joshua to you or for you.
What chapter?
But I am going to tell you, I don't know. I am going to share with you some notes that I came up with, and you can write them down or you can review them on this tape to probably get some more wisdom, some more insight here. Just want to bring this to your attention. So it is probably very instructive to compare this episode of sending in spies with Joshua sending in spies. And here are a couple of the ideas that I came up with. Moshe sent 12 spies. Joshua sent 2. Moshe sent spies openly. Joshua sent the 2 spies secretly. Moshe sent them out to spy out the whole land. Joshua only sent them to spy out one city. Moshe's spies didn't contact anyone. Joshua's spies were confronted by Rahab. Moshe's spies were given lengthy, explicit instruction. Joshua's spies were given only very brief instruction. Moshe's spies brought back fruit from the land. Joshua's spies brought back nothing. Moshe's spies seemingly didn't confront any danger, yet were terrified. Joshua's spies confronted great danger, yet were fearless. And I'm reminded, I have a parenthetical here, God gives grace to deal with reality and not your imagination. Moshe's spies were infected by fear and allowed it to take hold of them, and they spread it throughout the camp. We're not sure if the spies sent by Joshua were only reporting back to him, but their reports simply related what happened and what they saw with very brief commentary that was filled with a strong sense of faith in God. So that's a brief comparison, contrast of what the differences are between these 2 stories of spies being sent out. And also think about when Joseph and his brothers, when Joseph was in Egypt and his brothers came to his 10 brothers came to the land of Egypt, he said, "You are spies." Something to think about. Angela, would you like to? Would you like to come over and say?
No, I just noticed that also Joseph was with the ark. He followed the ark across the Jordan.
Joseph?
Joshua.
Oh, Joshua. What about him?
With the ark when he sent out his
Oh,
spies.
that's interesting. Yeah.
Like we first heard the word spy.
Sorry, Angela's talking off the microphone. She said it's interesting that Joshua was with the ark when they went across. Yeah, so that's an interesting insight. Anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding those comparisons? Okay. Interesting couple of notes that I want to bring out to you. Number one, you notice when Moses gives the instruction to these people. He says, go and check out the land and see what's in it and see if there's any trees in it. Your Torah in the original language does not actually say, see whether there are any trees in it. It literally says, see if there is a tree in it. Now that's interesting. Are we looking for any particular tree? Now the rabbis and the sages, Chazal, have said what that is a reference to is a tree is a metaphor for a righteous man. And that it was supposed that Job was a resident of the land of Canaan just prior to this time. And that what Moses was asking essentially is, when you're out there taking a look at this land, I want you to be on the lookout for any righteous individuals. See if there are any righteous men in that land. Now, why would Moses be concerned regarding whether there were any righteous men in that land? Some of the sages have suggested, well, if there was a righteous man in that land, he might have appealed to God for protection of the people among whom he was living, and God might listen to the prayer of that righteous man to save these people. But the sages say Job, who was potentially one of those righteous men he was talking about, had actually died just prior to this, and that is a reference to when the two spies who were faithful came back and said, their shadow of protection has been removed from them. There are no righteous men who live there, and their protection is gone. No one is going to intercede for them, to anyone who matters. They are ripe for the picking. They will be like bread for us. So that's just an interesting side note. That also is interesting to note if you're talking to a Jew about Yeshua, for example. They are wont to say they're often saying, hey, vicarious atonement, where one person's righteousness can somehow be transferred to somebody else. That's not a thing. You have heard me say to you before, and I'll say it again, that is not true. It is simply not true. There's a very common understanding in the writings of the rabbis for many, many years where it is entirely popular in rabbinic circles to talk about the righteousness, the tzaddik of a righteous generation, being able to atone for the sins of if he's a particularly righteous person, it could be a whole nation. It's not an uncommon thought in Judaism. So, just to throw that into the mix, to keep that on top of your mind. This is a very common thought. Now,
Alan,
who is it?
They also have the scapegoat, right?
Yes.
Well, they got that. And they have the whole sacrificial system.
Right. Yes, this is true. Are you talking about in relation to vicarious atonement?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. But some of them want to squawk about not being able to apply that from one man to another. They say, with the atonement sacrifice of the day of Yom Kippur, perhaps. But when you're talking about one man's righteousness being able to cover the sins of other people, yeah, that's not going to happen. They like to say that. It's simply not true.
They also got Moses. Moses' intercession for the whole children of Israel. God was going to wipe them all out.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's very true. However, it's not necessarily true to say that it is because of Moses' righteousness that the people are spared, because Moses certainly doesn't appeal to that. He doesn't make that argument. Not that he would. He's a humble man. He's not going to make that argument. But that idea is not brought forth in the text, that it is on the basis of anyone's righteousness. that Moses is interceding on behalf of the people. He's usually reminding God of promises that he's made regarding just being generous. But yes, I see what you're saying, that the righteousness of Moses is certainly given big weight in that. So
Well, I mean, I think we see examples in Scripture of, like, maybe we wouldn't say it was because of the righteousness of the person, but it's kind of implied. I mean, there's somewhere in Scripture God says, even if Samuel were to ask me this,
Right.
I wouldn't do it.
sure.
And there's that part where he says, hey, let's not talk to Abraham about this, because if we do talk to Abraham about this, we might have to reassess what we're doing. So, I mean, it doesn't say it's like an atoning work.
Right.
It kind of implies
You can imply it, sure.
that God cared.
And I think, that that's the reason why the rabbis have pulled that out, because it is actually fairly present in the text. It's not terribly well hidden. But when arguing with Christians regarding the sacrificial death of the Messiah, they like to throw up smoke screens and say, no, that can't happen. It's just not true. Jimmy, did you want to say something? No? Okay. I'm going to give the microphone to Angela for just a moment. She was going to make an observation.
Back to that spy word, because Alan just compared the spies that Joshua sent into Jericho to the spies that Moses sent. And though it's a different word now when Joshua sends them out, and it's used, this word that's used when Joshua sends them out, I think it's regal or something like that. If you look at the times that word is used, go back to the Joseph story when their brothers came to Egypt and Joseph accused them of being spies. That word is used 7 times in that story between Joseph, when the brothers came down and did not know who he was yet. And you are going to see, now put your thinking caps on, because you are going to see a parallel, and I think Alan's going to point it out, between this Joseph story and the story we're reading in our portion right now. So think about the number of spies, and think about, I don't know, just think. And he might pull this out.
Are you saying I might pull it out? Don't count on it.
I am counting.
So I want to, for my next trick, I want to point out a couple of things, just a couple of general observations regarding this episode. Notice that these are just general observations about how words matter. Think about this. The naysayers of this congregation of spies, 10 of them to be precise, put a heavy emphasis on the problems. The 10 started off with about 20% or less, probably 10% positive. It is indeed a good land that is flowing with milk and honey. Nevertheless, and there's where they got into trouble right away, when they threw in the word but. They threw in a big old stinky but. And they said, then they went to the other 80 to 90% of negative truth. Negative truth. Okay, so the first part that they are bringing up is when they first start to talk, these 10 spies, they say, it's a good land. It's exactly like God described it. However, nevertheless, but there is this problem and that problem and this problem and that problem. Each of those things that they brought up are true. They just said the people who live there are strong. They do live in fortified towns. They probably did see the sons of Anak there. They may have even seen a giant there. Those things are all true. Those things are all true. However, when they are actually confronted, where someone comes forward and wants to simply say, here is the truth from the positive side, then when they get confronted with that, they go 100% negative, and they exaggerate a bunch of untruths. And I want to take you to chapter 13, verse 31, to just run through this briefly for just a second. So Joshua and Caleb stand up and said, hey man, in verse 30, let's go up and possess it, for we are well able to do it. But then they say, the land which we passed through to search it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. What in the heck does that mean? The land devours its inhabitants?
Did you hear the thing that Grant said about the funerals?
Yes, I heard that.
Okay.
But the land devours its inhabitants? That is an unusual statement. This land is so nasty and vile that it is destroying its own inhabitants?
Well, we also have land that spews people out. So why wouldn't we have land that devours?
Well, we certainly could, and I wouldn't doubt that. However, the only problem that I'm having with their testimony here is that it directly contradicts what they said just 10 minutes ago, where they said, it is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. The problem that they had in their first telling was that there were some negative aspects. The people there's a lot of them. They're strong and hardy. They might be bigger than us. They live in fortified cities. This is not going to be an easy place to conquer. All of those things are true, undoubtedly true, from a literal, fleshly perspective. Just looking at it on its face, you could say, yes, each one of those things are true. But when they get to verse 31 and 32, they say, man, this land devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we have seen it are men of great stature. Also, impossible. Every man that they saw in it was of great stature? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. We saw the giants there, the sons of Anak. That might have been true. We were like grasshoppers in their sight. How can you possibly interpret the way someone else sees you? And then you interpret yourself. We also became like grasshoppers in their sight. You interpret how they see you based upon how you think they see you. Things go off the rails here as they begin to be confronted with the truth. Now, one thing that I would say to you in regards to how does this relate to the times that we're living in now and the things that we're dealing with in our world, and especially in relation to, for example, prophecy. I mean, we all love the study of prophecy, but I want you to remember this. Remember that 10 of these spies scared the people to death, and 2 of them encouraged them. I don't know when the last time you have listened to a prophecy buff speak. And I've heard a few in my day. But I will tell you this, I can't remember one that was particularly encouraging. It's really similar to 10 spies saying, man, there's going to be this problem, and there's going to be that problem, and this is going to happen, and there's going to be demons, and there's going to be an earthquake, and this is going to happen, and there's going to be a giant comet that strikes the earth, and everybody's going to die, and everything's going to catch on fire. There's going to be, the giants are going to reappear. There's going to be some aliens. That's the 10 spies, guys. Because the 2 spies said, we are well able. Now, I will tell you this. For some prophecy teachers out there, you might, if you're lucky, get a statement tacked on at the end of the presentation, almost like an afterthought. But praise the Lord, we know how it ends. and we win and we're victorious, and all the people go, yeah! Huzzah! We're going to win. Nevertheless, all the people are terrified because they just spent an hour telling you about all the problems, all the terrifying things that are going to happen during the tribulation period. Folks, I don't know about you, but I can tell you this. There is a lot of passages in the Bible about rescue, about great salvation, about deliverance, about God's mercy, and about people's lives being saved. But you don't hear that. You very rarely hear that. Or maybe I'm just have heard the wrong people. I don't know. If you know some prophecy pastor, buff, whatever, who loves to go out there and teach all of the wonderful salvation messages that are related to the end of days, send me a link. Put it in the comments if you're aware of somebody, because I'm not.
Can I just jump in?
Who is it?
Tracy. Who it is?
Who is it?
Tracy.
You go, girl.
So I was looking at the word for this evil report, and it's just interesting to me when you think about it. You've got the good and evil thing throughout Scripture, and what is the gospel? It's literally good news. It's a good report.
Yes.
So I think there's something to be seen just from what you're saying. It kind of brought to mind that this is an evil report.
Yep.
And it's not the gospel.
You're
The
good.
gospel message, So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more. I want you guys to be. I want you to be filled with faith. I want you to be filled with hope. I want you to when the things that are supposed to happen begin to happen, I want you to be able to look up and know that your salvation is nigh. Not that destruction is nigh, and not that everybody's going to die. I want you to look up and say, my salvation is drawing nigh. Now, does that mean you're going to live through the transition period? I don't know. But if you're faithful, you will be courageous. Remember when we were studying the book of Acts, that the most common evidence and manifestation of the Spirit of God coming upon people that we saw repeatedly was that they spoke and performed the work of God with absolute fearlessness. They seemed to have no mind to the people over here, the people over there that wanted to kill them, that would love to flog them and stone them to death. They tried. They gathered them up and threw them into prison, but an angel appeared and delivered them from prison. But they were fearless. They were absolutely fearless. That's what I want to see, is people facing what's going on out there in the world and, facing the end of days perhaps. I don't know. But just be strong and fearless. I'd love to see fearless people. I'd love to see that. Angela, come. Would you like to speak?
No, not until you get to the rending of the clothing. I
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Note here that a couple of other things. Fear ruling the mind invariably results in frantic and stupid action. Fear ruling the mind invariably results in frantic and stupid action.
Fear makes you do stupid things.
Fear makes you do stupid things. The answer is always to stop.
Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
Yes, repeat to yourself repeatedly. Stop and take a deep breath and remember the instructions of our God more than any admonition in the Bible is the admonition, do not be afraid. That is the most common commandment in your entire Bible. Do not be afraid. The answer to every question, every problem, every situation, the answer is always the same. The answer to every problem is God. The answer to every problem is to stop. Remember what Moses said to the people when they were standing next to the sea and they were freaking out and they were thinking they were going to die. Be still and watch the salvation of God. Stop, pray, and ask God for wisdom, for courage, for insight, for help. What do you need? What are you struggling with? Stop freaking out. Stop freaking out. Pray and ask God for what you need. The fear turned them against the faithful. Now, I have the 10 evil spies turned the whole assembly against the 2 who were faithful and threatened to kill them. Now, there's a prophetic picture, an unfortunate one. And I have a feeling, unfortunately, that when the prophet Daniel saw the vision of what was happening off into the future, that he became ill for many days. And I think that several of the prophets who saw things unfolding in the end times were stupefied. Why were they stupefied? I have this idea in my mind. I can't prove it. Maybe you can. It's just an idea that you should contemplate. I think that perhaps part of the reason that they were stupefied is that they looked into the future and they saw that the people who were behaving wickedly and were persecuting the righteous were God's own people. The church. And you shouldn't be surprised by that. It was the 10 brothers who threw Joseph into the pit. It was these 10 spies who turned against the other 2. It was the Roman Catholic Church who persecuted and killed and burned at the stake more Christians than probably Muslims and Buddhists and communists combined, undoubtedly. What this says to me is, and it shouldn't surprise you also, because you know, as you have begun to study the Hebrew roots of your faith, that where you're getting the most pushback and where you're getting the most problems is from your brothers and sisters. People who don't know anything about God, they're like, wow, that's interesting. You know, that makes more sense to me about religion than anything I've ever heard. But it's your brothers and sisters in the local congregations who are saying you are of the devil. This is instructive to me. This is instructive for me. Will the fearful and the faithless turn against the faithful? Does persecution arise from within the church itself? I think it might. And that's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. And you know, here's one other thing. When these pronouncements from God, where he's telling Moses, okay, stand back, watch me now, watch what happens here. He's about to destroy all these people. And, chapter 14, verse 34 says something quite interesting, and I just want to point this out to you. In chapter 14 and verse 34, it says, after the number of the days in which you have searched out the land, 40 days each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquities 40 years, and you will know my estrangement. My estrangement. If you look at that in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, You will know my tenuati. Tenuati is the connection. You will know my opposition. You will know my alienation. You will know my enmity. 40 years you will know my enmity. Now, think about this. Did the children of Israel eat manna during the 40 years in the wilderness? Yes. Did they have water from a rock who followed them throughout the wilderness? Yes. Did they have a cloud? Did they have a pillar? Did they have protection? Yes. And yet, it says that he would be alienated from them. I think that what we're seeing here is God saying to them, it's not going to be the same between you and me.
We're in that 40.
And folks, we are in those times.
It's 40 Jubilees.
Been 40, almost 40 Jubilees since Yeshua the Messiah has died. 40 Jubilees is approximately equal to 2,000 years. We have been in a 2,000-year period of estrangement from God. Many, many, many bad things have happened. There has been just a sense of, where is God? What is he doing? Why don't we feel his presence? He's there, and he's helping us every step of the way, and yet there's this sense of alienation. There's this sense of hostility. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. Have the last 2,000 years been characterized by some great, righteous, faithful group of people? No. A very small group of righteous, faithful people. Exactly like 2 out of 10. 2 out of 12. 2 out of 12. It's exactly like that. So, we see history just repeating itself. Not unusual. Not unusual. And then you see Joshua and Caleb tear their clothing. And I want Angela to take just a moment to speak to you regarding the rending of the clothing.
Okay. The word for when they rent their clothing is kara. And after the 10 spies give their report and things go really wrong, Joshua and Caleb rend their clothing. They tear their clothing. Now, if you look at the first 3 times this word is used for rending the clothing, it's all a part of one story, and it's the Joseph story. Let me explain. The first time you hear of rending the clothing, it's Reuben, the firstborn son, when he goes to the pit and sees that Joseph is no longer in it. He rends his clothing. The second time is when the brothers go back to Jacob, the father, tell him his son is dead. His son Joseph is dead. He rends his clothing. Keep in mind, this is 10 brothers. 10 brothers giving their father a false report. Number 3 is when they find the cup in Benjamin's sack when they're coming back from Egypt. And now it's the 10 brothers who all rend their clothing. So you've got the 10 brothers, their false report, the rending of the clothing.
What's the conclusion that you want to draw there?
They can draw
You can't just throw a bomb like that out into the conversation without drawing some conclusions.
With it what they want.
Sorry, folks, I'm kicking this lady here. I'm saying, hey, if you're going to bring something like that in, you better make some commentary. What are you trying to point out?
Make the end statement.
I don't know exactly. Who is it?
Hey, Alan.
Yes, I am.
Keith.
Keith. Hey, Keith. Speak it, Brother Keith.
Just so they knew who's talking. Okay, so, I picked up what Angela was laying down there, because the fact that just like the 10 presented themselves in front of the father and said, hey, Joseph's dead, and they gave a bad report, then he rent his clothing, so the 10 spies gave the bad report, so Joshua and Caleb, they reacted the same way.
Excellent.
Right? Isn't that where we're going with that?
I agree. Yep.
10 for 10, and then...
Yeah, and that's a very good insight, Keith. I'm picking up what you're laying down. Consider this too. When you get to the 12 disciples of Yeshua, for example, note that one of them betrays him and one of them denies him. It is like the whole thing has been flipped in reverse. It's inverted, like the two halves of a menorah. Was someone going to comment? No? Okay. I just thought that's quite interesting that the scales seem to be reversed to where over here you have 10 unfaithful and 2 faithful, and over here you have 2 unfaithful and 10 faithful. Now, of course, Peter, the one who is unfaithful, Peter, does come back. Now, there's a whole separate thing going on there that you might look at. It's just, something to think about. I think I'm about done. Yes, I think I'm about done. I've gotten myself worked up. I hope you're well. I hope it was helpful for you. Any comments, questions? What?
Wait, Angela said she was going to let us try to figure out something about the Joshua and the what was it, the other story?
The rending of the clothing and
Joshua.
Yeah, absolutely. You got some more to add?
You're supposed to pull something out of your hat.
No, you guys.
No, I don't.
This is time for you guys.
She threw something out there and just left it out there like a stink bomb, and I'm like, you're supposed to
It's
say.
time for you guys to think about.
She's saying she threw it out there for something for you guys to ponder. She's seeking to get off the hook.
Well, I'm just waiting for the collection plate to be passed around.
Yeah, it's a good insight. I know there's some great wisdom there, but you'll have to think about it a little bit. It's the Sabbath, and you got, the next 24 hours to contemplate.
The 10 and the 2.
Yeah, think about the 10 and the 2. I'm gonna look at a couple of these. We got 48 comments. My goodness, you people are chatty tonight.